Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Ryan, aka Ryantist the Scientist. I am on a mission to empower and inspire everyone with knowledge and fervor of the natural world. Maybe you have some questions, and that's great. I'm here to answer them for you. So let's do that together here on another episode of Ryantist the Scientist. Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Ryantist the Scientist. Today is a very fun and silly, but not silly episode about pollution. I got a really fun message, and I'm just gonna go ahead and play it.
Hey, Ryantist. Love the podcast. Just calling in because I have a question, a personal question. I was just wondering, what is your personal least favorite form of pollution? Thanks so much for answering. Can't wait to listen to your podcast about it. Bye!
So, my least favorite type of pollution. I feel like, I don't really enjoy any pollution. But here's my experience with pollution. Here's some stuff. I'm gonna give you some history, and then I'm gonna give some which one's my least favorite based off of my experiences and then my research. So I have asthma, and one of the things that can impact asthma significantly is air quality. So there was a year, I think it was 2021 or 2020, where my asthma was pretty bad. I was very sensitive to environmental triggers for it. So there was I was very sensitive to air quality alert days when the ozone and the pollution was just really bad. So there was a period of time in 2020 where I think it was the summer of 2020 where no, it wasn't. It was the summer of 2021 where the pollution from everybody back on the roads, driving to the city, going to work, and everything was starting to turn back on. That we had a lot of higher pollution and more frequent air quality alert days where the amount of particulate matter in the air, as well as ozone that was trapping it all here, it happened pretty frequently, and it sucked for me. And it was also during a period of time that I was having a lot of difficulty with insurance because I'm not a rich American. So I was having a lot of problems with getting access to medication. It was kind of the perfect storm for me where I was experiencing a lot of asthma problems because the air quality from air pollution was pretty bad that summer, and I couldn't get medication to help me get through those days. So the place that I was dealing with and trying to get medication through the avenues that I had was not pleasant, and the pharmacy told me that the medication I had wasn't covered by the medication being prescribed wasn't covered by my insurance at the time. and the insurance company said that it was, and the doctor's office said that it was, but that they would change it to a different one that was, and then the pharmacist would not cover that one, and like the cycle happened a lot. So I had this period of time where, because of air pollution from from the combustion of fossil fuels, I'm gonna get into like how all that stuff works in a second, but my experience with it first. So because of the air pollution and my experience with healthcare in the United States, there was air pollution. I was having difficulty breathing. I could not get medication because it wasn't covered. It was covered. So I called, I had like to put on my blinders, and just like this was the only thing that I did. I just focused on figuring this out for like weeks. And every single day I called each one of the people and told each one of the people what the other people said, and got kind of mad, very like audibly mad and visibly mad. And like ultimately what ended up happening was the doctor's office told me that they had some free samples, some samples that were dropped off by reps, which is like a stupid thing that happens. So there was just like free medication that I could have had this whole time at the doctor's office, so I could come and pick it up. I went to go and pick it up, and the person who worked at the doctor's office, it's a hospital, by the way, a big one, was annoyed with how often this was a thing, how often I was calling, how I was, having a difficulty. Everybody was telling me something different. It was like annoying. I'm sure it was annoying. It was more annoying for me, though. I promise you. She ended up like throwing the medication at me, literally throwing it at me. And then I left and I finally got it. And then ultimately it turned out that the pharmacist at the pharmacy did not even try to run it. She just assumed that she was right when she thought that there was no generic for like the prescription that was being given to me for my asthma because of air pollution. So like for like several weeks it was like difficult for me to feel normal breathing because of air pollution. So it's one of the ones that I'm not a big fan of because of where I live. It's something that like we all have to deal with. However, there's also like taking a step back, depending on where you live, you have to deal with it more so than others. So the amount of air pollution that exists and where it's generated is not equal. And there are specific neighborhoods and demographics of people that are exposed to air pollution more than others. And those are low income communities, communities of color. And they experience air pollution at higher rates, and the air pollution actually causes asthma. And so the rates of asthma are actually higher in children in these communities than they are in other communities. So, like, the existence of the air pollution has created like systemic inequality in access to clean air, which impacts human health in a super negative way. And like that was just my experience with it. And a lot of other people have similar experiences navigating this issue, which is like a health issue because of an environmental issue. And so like how does this all happen? So where to start? So there's ozone, which like there's the ozone layer that's around like the earth, but then there's atmospheric ozone, and that's bad. So when you are in your car and when you're on a highway and there's traffic, let's say, so there's traffic, you're on a highway, you're in your car, there's trucks, there's all these like emissions of fossil fuel, combustion of fossil fuel, and in the form of exhaust. In the exhaust are all these different types of materials. There's nitrous oxide. There's nitrous oxides. There's sulfur dioxide. There's carbon dioxide, there's carbon monoxide. There used to be lead, but there's not anymore, thankfully. And then there's particulate matter. So just like soot, like gross stuff, the stuff that you can like see, the black stuff. So all of that gets like emitted into the atmosphere and interacts with the oxygen in the atmosphere. And so what happens is like oxygen is O2, ozone is O3. So when the all these different things are emitted, there's carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide. There's all these like extra O's flying around that the sun, so when it's like hot out and the sun is shining in this traffic ridden, not so fun city situation that's going on. So the sun comes and it breaks down these molecules. The solar radiation breaks down these molecules and splits some of the O's, the oxygens, away from these other compounds that can bind to the oxygen molecules and create O3, ozone. And that's how like ozone gets created. So then how does it get like those like thick smogs? So what happens like while that's happening, let's say there's also a it's super hot and then cold air from because of all this like city stuff, including the heat island effect because it's hotter in cities because of all the pavement and the concrete and the processes and everything that happens. There's cold air that comes and creates like a layer of cold air over all of this in the atmosphere, and it traps all this stuff so that it can't get out. So this like atmospheric ozone gets stuck at this layer of like cooler air over the top, and all of this other stuff can't get through it to get out of the area. So this like becomes like a little dome of nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, but particularly like particulate matter. So all this like little particles of like ash, soot from like combustion, and like the processes of making it. It's like all this stuff gets stuck in like the atmosphere and it builds up and becomes smog, and it's very bad for you. And that's the stuff that you breathe in, and it's bad air quality, and it can cause health issues. The World Health Organization has put out information about like how many people die every single year because of this particular issue, and it's a lot around the world, and it's not better in the United States than in other places, although the air quality in the United States is better now than it used to be. We still have this problem in a lot of the communities that we have, particularly in cities. The other part of this is that, and then it all blows away. So then like a cold front will come in and it'll create movement in the atmosphere, and this like bubble of all this stuff will blow away, it'll clear up, and then it'll go someplace else. So like what's not so far away from like cities where ozone gets generated is like where we grow food, farms. So then these ozone moves out over into these like areas of agriculture, and ozone actually damages crops, and it makes it so that the efficiency or the yield of crops goes down, because it's toxic to the plants and they can't photosynthesize as well. So yeah, so it's like a super compounded issue. Like air pollution is like not cute. We don't like it. But then there is water. So fresh water is a deceptively small resource. We have tons of water because we live on Earth, and there is an ocean that is everywhere. It's like 70% of the planet is oceans. But the amount of fresh water is 0.5% of all the water in the world is accessible forms of fresh water that are not frozen in glaciers or ice caps or ice sheets. So 0.5% of all the water that exists in the world is fresh water, and we don't treat it very well. So like one of the concerns that I have about freshwater is, so like in the United States. So I've done research on water quality in the United States, and using publicly available data from water utilities around the whole entire country, I opted to look specifically at New York State. Um, like the amount of stuff that's in our water because of things like industrial processes where the government permits the release of of like manufacturing and industrial processes byproducts. Like they allow it to be released into the environment. It gets monitored to see if it gets to specific levels that are like trigger points for certain things to happen, like cleanups, things like that. But like ultimately, like you're like allowed to pollute like the water. You're allowed to. You just have to do certain things beforehand to make sure that the what is getting into the water isn't horrendous, and that it doesn't degrade the water so much so fast that it's like damaged for forever. So there are like regulations involved in it, but like generally speaking, you're like allowed to pollute if you're like an industry. You just have to get permission from the government to do it, from the EPA. So like this stuff like gets into the water, and then some of the stuff doesn't go away, or it takes a long time to like break down. Some of the infrastructure that moves all this like water around is old and is not made of good materials. Like things like lead come to mind. But ultimately, in my research in New York, I opted to look specifically at hexavalent chromium, which, if you've seen the movie Erin Brockovich, that is the same compound that I was looking at, is the one that she was looking for at Pacific Gas and Electric Company in California, where they took them to court and they won, and there was a settlement because they had quantities of hexavalent chromium in water in Hinckley County, or in Hinckley in San Bernardino County in California, that was like tremendously unhealthy. So I looked at that in New York and found that with a 95% certainty, if you are drinking water from a water utility in the state of New York, you are drinking hexavalent chromium in a quantity that is higher than what is deemed safe. There's like politics involved in this too. So like, safe according to whom? Because in the United States, if it was not safe in accordance to the Environmental Protection Agency, then that would trigger some stuff, or at least provide the ability for somebody to do something. There would be like some protections involved. However, there's all this like false controversy around chromium because of the way that it's carcinogenic, and that like certain things need to happen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there is published research that drinking it as opposed to breathing it also allows for this like stuff to happen to the compound that makes it carcinogenic. That's like the argument, is that like if you drink it, it's not carcinogenic, but if you inhale it, it is carcinogenic. That's like not real. Like it's carcinogenic. So like the World Health Organization and groups like the Environmental Working Group have standards of what is healthy based off of like actual research, and not just like an arbitrary number that was created in like the 60s for something. So, and they're also like the environmental working group is doing like pressuring to like make those higher, because water is such a scarce resource and we shouldn't mess with it and make it not safe, because like there's only so much of it, and it's really really important not to mess with it. So like the amount of chromium that exists in New York is like, it's like statistically guaranteed that you are drinking water that has chromium in it that is not good for you. And there are ways that you can filter it out, like an under the counter reverse osmosis filtration system will remove this and most other contaminants from drinking water. So they're like $100, $120 from Home Depot, and they work really, really well for everything. Just about everything, as far as like what are the contaminants that are present in the United States. So there's a ton of that's only one of the contaminants in New York State. There's, I believe, 9 or 10 in total that are of concern. And there's, I would say, like, getting back to your question. So like, I would say that my least favorite form of pollution is water pollution, because air pollution, it's much more obvious. You can see it. You can see air pollution. You can smell air pollution. You can go outside and tell that there's air pollution happening to you that day. There's like a there's an environmental injustice component to air pollution that makes it much more impactful and problematic in certain communities than other communities. And there are things that are happening to make headway in that air pollution. But like water pollution is like much more like, to me, water pollution is much more insidious, because like when it's really bad, you can tell it's really bad. You can look at like a very polluted body of water and tell that it's very polluted. However, there's a lot of these insidious pollutants and like contaminants that are very, very prevalent in water supplies in the United States and beyond, that are not so obvious and have like significant implications on human health. And the like legal systems that we have in place are not really effective at doing anything about it. And like a really, really good example of this is fracking. So like fracking, it gets contaminants into the water table. And one of these contaminants is chromium, and there are plenty of other contaminants that it puts into the water. And these like legislative attempts at regulating water pollution like aren't working. So that's why I think that like water pollution is my least favorite type of pollution, or it's the one that I think about all of the time. And because it matters to everything, because water is, you need it to live. You need it to grow food. So like not only is it us that's getting it, like water irrigation happens through like water utilities too. And so like it's all getting sprayed on all the food that we eat. And then there's like the pesticide problem, but like that like chromium is like being sprayed on everything too, and like being absorbed into the like tissue of plants. And there's like water in plants when you're eating it, so it's like in there too, and it's like not a good look. And like it's got like a little bit more of an insidious nature to it. It's not as like in your face. But the good news is that there's this movement called, and I'm actually talking with the woman who's in charge of this organization, Maya Van Rossen, who, her strategy and her organization is working towards and has succeeded creating state constitutional amendments that provide environmental rights. So, like the right to clean water, air, and environment. And that, like, the legislative attempts at providing these protections is not efficient enough. It doesn't work. And there's plenty of history to indicate why that's true. And that going the route of constitutional amendments is that, like, by providing a constitutional right to people to have clean water, clean air, etc., is a higher standard. It trumps everything else. Like, there are laws that cannot violate that because they allow for certain things to happen, like pollution, etc., etc. And there's no actions that you can take that can violate that as like an industry practitioner. So like it's like a better form of protection. And like I'm actually going to be speaking with her. And I'm not sure if I think this episode I'm going to have come out before hers, because I'm actually going to ask her about some of this stuff with like the chromium and et cetera, et cetera. So like, definitely tune in for that episode if you are disturbed by pollution or are interested in this concept of environmental constitutional rights. Because what's interesting is that if you live in the state of New York, or if you live in the state of in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you actually have this already. Her organization has gotten passed. In New York, well, Pennsylvania already had one. It was just like never acknowledged. And then I forget what year, but a few years ago in New York State, we just passed an environmental constitutional right or a constitutional right to environmental protections. So like that's like a new thing that's happening. It's really, really exciting, and it's like 100% something that like I'm down to get behind. I'm already behind it. Super excited to talk to her about it. But yeah, so ultimately I think that like all pollution is like really, really scary, and it has like a lot of like detrimental consequences. Water pollution, particularly like with contaminants, that's that's my least favorite, because or that's the one that I think about all the time. Like, least favorite is like a weird way of saying it, but like it's the one that I think about all of the time, because like water is like so important, and there's so little of it in the world, and we're already starting to see like the beginnings of issues regarding access to water in a changed climate world, and that's only going to change more. And that, like, I think about it a lot. So I hope that answers your question. I hope that I haven't caused any like eco anxiety and climate anxiety. Please know that there are things that are just true and that need to be like acknowledged, and like so that we can figure them out, like these issues with like water pollution and with air pollution. But that like there are people who are working to solve this. There are people who are working to like fix this stuff, and like tremendous headway does get made on like a regular basis. I don't want to only say like the bad stuff. So like these constitutional environmental amendments, these green amendments as she calls them, Maya, they are, it's like gonna happen. And then like the end goal is for like there to be a constitutional, like a federal constitutional amendment. You can go on her website, Green Amendments for the Generations, and see how many states have already started the process. If you're in a state that's not on that website, that has not started the process, start the process by getting in touch with her organization. And her organization is specifically there to help people in states that want to see this happen make it happen. So like, yeah. There's also the Environmental Working Group, who works as like, they do a ton of research and they make data available. They have like a bunch of databases regarding contaminants and like for the protection of individuals. But they also do a lot of like pressuring. I've talked about them before. They do a lot of pressuring and pushing for industries to stop releasing these chemicals and these contaminants, as well as for more protections in like forms of legal protections for people from contaminants. They're a really, really good resource. They have like a list of things that they like certify as being like contaminant free, and like are the types of things that you should pick as far as like options for items that you need. So yeah, like they're a really, really good resource if you're disturbed by this and like want to learn more about like the work that's happening to fix it. I do hope that this answers your question and gives you like a little bit more insight on me as a human being and the experiences that I have in the world of like the environment, how we interact with it, and how therefore it interacts with me, and the kinds of like research that I've done about. I think I'm going to put it on my website, probably Ryantist.com. I'll put up the thing that I wrote about chromium in New York if you're interested in looking at it. Thank you for calling in with your question. I look forward to more questions that are kind of like more like this, personal questions, and kind of like relating all these things to being like a little bit less abstract and more like connected to us as like individuals, myself included. So thank you for that. Thank you for listening, for tuning in and listening. Your support by participating in the show and by listening is very, very important. It matters a lot to me, so thank you. Remember that for every episode of this show that is published because of your questions or because of my ability to make content for you, because you are tuning in, I have a reforestation project where every episode that I publish plants a tree, and the revenue generated by each episode and by my Patreon contributes also to reforestation of Appalachia, as well as other historically deforested parts of the United States and around the world through some of the organizations that I've partnered with. More information on that is on my website as well, Ryantist.com. If you'd like to support the show in other ways, you can support it on Patreon for as little as $3 a month, and a portion of that goes to every month planting another tree per patron. So a $3 donation for you a month helps the show and plants a tree every single month. Also, you can just follow the show wherever you listen to the podcasts, on YouTube. You can find this on there as well. You can find my show on YouTube. Wherever you want to listen to it, you can find it. And you can also support by leaving your reviews and comments. It all helps. It all helps grow the show. So thank you very much for your question, and thank you for your continued support. If you have questions that you would like to ask, call into the show. That phone number is 347-470-4144. Again, 347-470-4144. And remember, there are no questions that are too big or too small. Music for the show was created by Julian Giamma. I want to say thank you so much for working with me to create such a fun song, and thank you everyone for listening and for supporting the show. See you all again next week.